I liken it to Moses, coming off of that mountain. We went up to get the Ten Commandments. What did they do when he was gone? They took all their jewelry, they melted it down and made a golden calf. And then the guy's going to get up and bring all the moral teachings in the world, and what do? They worship it. That's where we are today. See, everything is interpreted in the bottom line. That's what makes sense to people.
Steel was basically what there was in the Mahoning Valley, and everything else tended to be trucking for steel or fabricating of steel.
In Youngstown, we make steel. We make steel and talk steel.
And so we were a prototype of the one industry town.
And Youngstown was a principal steel producer. It had Republic Steel, it had Youngstown Sheet and Tube, had U.S. Steel, and it was the backbone of the economy in Youngstown, Ohio. Over the years, Youngstown had built roads, supplied power lines, water, gas, and our raw materials were nearby here. We then provided schools for the families.
You had an interesting community here in Youngstown. I had never seen anything quite like it, because you'd have father, mother living here. 3 or 4 blocks away would be the son. The typical life trajectory was that a young man would graduate high school, he'd go in the military, shape him up, make a man out of him, and then he'd come home and a cousin or an uncle or his dad would speak to the foreman, get him a job in the mill. And I think the expectation, the unconscious expectation was that that way of life would go on forever.
I got hired into Briar Hill in the open earth, in a millwright game. And I'd never, ever seen anything like that in my life or been around it. It was like stepping into hell or something. It was dirty, it was cold, and then you got by the furnace, it was hot, it burned you, It was noisy. I had been elected to union office, and the job I had was the recording secretary. I just had the 2 children, they're both very young. And then my last child, another daughter, wasn't born until after I was actually out of work. We lived modestly like a lot of people. I don't recall that we really took vacations, but that's the way it was. But you could figure out a long weekend or take some days off, and I remember going to Toronto, Niagara Falls, because I remember the photograph of the kids playing amongst all the daffodils, the flowers and stuff like that. It was September 19th, 1977. Monday's probably the most difficult day in local union work anyway, because all the trouble over the weekend has been brewing up, the fighting and the discipline, it all comes in there Monday morning, So, and then around 10 o'clock or so, a couple guys come in and it started picking up more guys. I heard on the radio, they're closing Campbell. And you got it wrong. We don't believe that stuff. Can't be. So had they said Briar Hill, it would have been believable, because that was always kind of suspected. If a plant wouldn't make it, it'd be that one. And that was our plant. But Campbell, oh my God, couldn't happen.
5,000 people were put out of work in a single day. But it was such a massive layoff of workers. It created a crisis in the city. So it was talked about every place. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere to lunch or shopping. You bump into somebody in our family and family gatherings. And so it was bad, and it stayed that way. It was devastating. As I knew it, there was interest, and local clergy and local lay people and union members were invited to come to a meeting. And out of that meeting became a steering committee, and it had the name of the Ecumenical Coalition, which was really a distinct and new kind of involvement of churches in this kind of industry issue.
I went to one of those meetings. All the politicians came out, from everywhere. What got me, they kept saying, well, we're going to be all right. Kept trying to reassure us, fine, nobody's got a job, but we're going to be fine, how's that work? Somebody, and it was a guy who I think had a grocery store, some little market or something there in Campbell. And he talked about how, his belief in Americans and the values or whatever. If they won't run it, we should run it ourselves. And then a light bulb went off.
This community, all of its citizens, its skilled steel workers and their families, might create a new form of community-owned and operated steel plant.
After World War II, I think the United States steel industry felt that it had the international market for steel wrapped up. And this had the unfortunate result that steel in the United States didn't keep up with the most recent technology. That was the question with the steel industry. Whether the old plant could be made more efficient, or whether it made more sense just to, as I used to say, throw Youngstown away like an orange peel. The Campbell Works in southern Youngstown, Briar Hill Works, little north of downtown. With those facilities, the question was getting government assistance. They had, I think, $100 million in a federal steel loan fund for the entire country. We needed more than $200 million to modernize the plant if it were reopened. The United States government had created a fund to provide assistance to the steel industry nationwide. And it wasn't even a large enough fund to meet our needs in one geographical location, because it was obvious, even to a neophyte, an amateur like myself, what was the point of reopening the mill if you didn't modernize it, It couldn't compete. The same history would repeat itself. They weren't going to give us money. It was going to be kind of guaranteed loans sort of thing. We could borrow the money from some private lender and the US government would guarantee the loans.
And the methodology that we were using to demonstrate to the government that we were really behind this and the community was behind it is that we asked the community to open Save Our Valley savings accounts. So we asked the churches for people to make phone calls. You tell them who you are, you're calling them to see if they will help save the valley. Then you tell them, well, how do you do that? You open a Save Our Valley savings account. Thousands of savings accounts were opened. I don't know the exact number. They didn't have to open huge accounts. We wanted them to open a $100 account. So we gave people not only hope, but we gave them a way.
Well, the question, of course, is what's the alternative? Realistic non-hope? I mean, for crying out loud, what did you expect people to do? You know, one of the jokes that life played on us is if we'd been trying to reopen a group of grocery stores, we could have done it. We happened to pick the most capital-intensive industry on the face of the earth, where you needed money, 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 money. The Chamber of Commerce always thought we were off our rockers. You know, who are these people who know nothing about steel and talk about some kind of worker community ownership? Everybody draws their belt a few notches tighter and you make it through as a community. That was my theme. I do feel that there was a responsible decision not to open again without modernization. And we just couldn't find the money. That was it.
You know, you could fight everything if you got somebody to fight with, if you got somebody to talk to, if you got somebody to negotiate with. Once they decide they don't want you anymore, they throw you in the dustbin. And that's what American corporations have done to American workers. It's all corporate values. The human values have just been lost. Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, where are they? I don't know.
When you can't affect things and bring any change out of your own wisdom and your own actions, it again just robs you of your dignity and robs you of your humanity. One of the workers lost all the hair on his body. He was so stressed out. He lost all the hair on his body. We had a man who was a nonviolent man take a gun, I don't know if it's a rifle or a pistol, into the Campbell City Hall and say, "I want a job." Carried a gun in, threatening them. Now, you add all those things up and you see this massive impact. It's actually changing the hearts and minds of people, and they're acting in violent ways in which they never acted before. Young people couldn't afford to buy houses, so you had some of the population moving out of Youngstown, moving to Texas, where there were jobs. And I had families in my church move away. Some people, in terms of the spiritual impact, their families were being broken up. And they knew of families who were broken up. So the hurt was not merely with those directly affected, but you had a wounded community also.
I think there's no point in disguising the fact that it's, on the whole, been a story of failure and defeat, but that we're not the only people in human history who've been defeated, and that spiritually, at least, good things can come out of that kind of experience.
Well, you know, and I look back, and I think I've always felt this way when I look back at our efforts to save the mills, you know, because it came as just a tremendous shock. Like, it's indescribable. It's indescribable what a shock that was. And this idea of, you know, trying to save it or bring it back, and, you know, community ownership. What was the alternative? Did we do nothing and just go home, walk away? Am I proud of it? I guess, you know, in a sense, you go down swinging, you've been in a fight, you got beat, but, you know, you gave it your best. People know we gave it our best.
And are you proud of the fight in the coalition?
Very.
We were fighting for the dignity of the working man, and that the working man get a fair chance, and that the working man be able to exercise some power over his own life. Because in these situations, the corporation had all the power. But in that was our focus picture of trying to reopen a traditional industry that's been in this community for 100 years. And it just wasn't a project. It was for real. And I remember that we were accused of giving false hope to people. That's a very serious charge. Hope is fundamental to be able to live. You got to have hope in the future. And we live by hope. And that's what we're sharing with the people. Because that's what we're asked to do. Are you your brother's keeper? If you are going to live in the way of Christ and in the way of the Judaic and Islamic traditions, you're going to care for your brother and your sister.
The Ecumenical Coalition was calling today a new day for Youngstown, Bright Tuesday, compared to last year's Black Monday.
The light that we light today is a light to the nation.
The valley was plunged in doubt, but not despair. Struck down, but not destroyed. The light dimmed, but was not extinguished. Out of the ashes rose the light of a new consciousness. We come as victors in our faith, not as victims of fate.
The coalition is also reminding the valley that there's still an uncertainty about its future, and therefore that light of hope has to keep burning. Odia Duma, Newswatch 27 with the Minicam in Campbell.